Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Johnny B 9458, advocating for mental health awareness, mental health wellness, tied to education. I need to say something to you guys, okay? Um, I feel as though I have not really been doing you guys justice in my goal of advocating for mental health diseases, signs and symptoms, causes and effects, and how mental health illnesses can affect people's day to day life. I have been trying to be very careful in what I say. One, because I am on social media and I don't want to go against social media's community guidelines where my video gets blocked. Two, because I have been trying to be careful not to upset anyone, injure anyone, cause harm to anyone. Um, However, when speaking about mental health illnesses, right, causes and effect, childhood trauma, people causing harm to me that can mess with my mental health. There are so many reasons why I try to, again, downplay my disease. We talked about that, right? How a lot of people with mental health illness try so hard to conform to society and downplay our signs and symptoms because of fear of how society will respond. Again, it seems like people are more susceptible to conversations regarding hypertension, high blood pressure, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, um, obesity. Like a lot of people feel as though these conversations are more acceptable in society. But when you start talking about mental health illnesses, people get quiet. They stop talking. They shy away from those conversations. They walk away. Um, I do not understand how when mental health diseases affects millions of people, how is it that we are so uncomfortable when talking about our mental health illnesses? And the sad part is, right, a lot of people lose their battles to their mental health illnesses every day because a lot of people don't talk about that stuff. And not only do we not talk about it, but the way people respond to people with mental health illnesses. They judge us, they criticize us, they shame us, um, they try to back us down into a corner. The climate around how society responds to mental health illnesses. Like we always talk about, when somebody passes away from either taking their own life or, you know, um, losing their battle to their mental health illnesses, we mourn, we get sad. It shows up in social media. Um, we want to talk about it then. But when people are alive and well and they want to have conversations about their mental health illnesses, it seems that it makes society uncomfortable. So a lot of us will suffer or struggle with our mental health illness in silence. I am a new published author of the book titled God's Gift to You. It is a memoir of events that I experienced as a child growing up in the Roxbury and Dorchester sections of Boston, Massachusetts in the 70s and the 80s, where I address childhood trauma. I address children being abused. I address young adults who were undereducated, who were young, having children while dealing drugs, using and abusing drugs. I'm talking a whole community of young adults having children before they even finished high school or continued their education beyond the grade level that they stopped going to school at. I'm talking about young adults who were using and abusing drugs. I'm talking about adults who obviously had some underlying mental health issues that went undetected because society just seen a bunch of young people using and abusing drugs and felt like a lot of their signs and symptoms stemmed from the fact that they were using and abusing drugs. So a lot of them who had mental health illnesses back then, those illnesses went undetected. But just because mental health illnesses go undetected doesn't mean that it's not causing harm to people. So in my book, God's Gift to You, yes, I speak on those subjects because a lot of those children from that community that I grew up in, unfortunately, they didn't make it out of those communities. There was so much toxicity and harmful things that affected their growth, their development, mentally and physically, and they didn't make it. So I named my book God's Gift to You because not that I care about religion, but because I know that the fact that I survived, that I made it out of that neighborhood was a gift in itself. The gifts were that I grew up and learned about mental health diseases and learned about the disease of addiction and learned about childhood trauma and was able to live to tell my story and share it with others in the hopes that people will wake up and get more comfortable with talking about mental health illnesses. For those who don't know, mental health illnesses is a real medical concern, just like any other medical concern. It seems like society is more acceptable to talking about the physical ailments more than they are when talking about the mental ailments. And I am here to show the world what it's like for a person who has a mental health illness. For many years, I was told that I should write a story about my life. And for many years, I didn't want to do it because my childhood was so horrific that I just felt like, you know what? I got through it. I made it past it. I survived it. And in my adult years, I felt like I never wanted to revisit my past. However, whether I realized it or not, I was still reliving my past on a day to day basis because my past has caused me to have a mental health illness that affects my day to day life. So, whether I talked about it or not, it was affecting me. And how about, right, when you survive childhood trauma, right, by the hands of people who were putting your life to protect you, to guide you, to teach you, to keep you safe. And they fail to do that, but yet these people are still in your life. So even as an adult, yes, I might have survived the childhood trauma, but even as an adult, I was still allowing people to cause me harm because I did not know that those people were causing me harm. I thought that all that stuff that surrounded me in my childhood was just normal things that went on in life, not realizing that they were actually harmful. So as an adult, when I started learning about my mental health illness, the signs, the symptoms, the causes, the effects, I had to start looking at some of these people that were in my life who were supposed to had raised me, kept me safe, taught me, cared for me, loved me, right? I had to realize that even though I was an adult now, I was still in these people's lives, and even as an adult, they were still causing harm to me. So I had to learn how to set boundaries, right? Because some of these people I can't just walk away from because they are my family members. And I know I see a lot of things on social media, on, the news media, how people cut their parents out of their lives to protect their mental health diseases, siblings that no longer speak to each other and are no longer in each other's life. And I don't know how people do that because although my mom was very harmful to me, she's still my mother. And when I started learning about mental health diseases, I had to realize that that lady that raised me, that lady who continues to be in my life, whom I call my mother, is not the woman that raised me. Like it wasn't my mom who raised me, it was a woman with a mental health illness. And as far as my siblings, right, I had to realize that my mom was not only causing harm to me that affected my life, but also was causing harm to my siblings and had to watch how that childhood trauma affected them in their life. So sometimes my siblings might be harmful to me and I might have to remove myself from them for a while, but to never speak to them again, yeah, we're not doing that. I had to realize that I wasn't the only child that grew up in my mother's house. I wasn't the only child that my mother was abusing. She abused all her children. So, no matter how my siblings and I interact with one another, sometimes being harmful to one another, I'm not going to just walk away from them or their life because of their mental health diseases. We grew up in a society where, as young children, we were surrounded by violence. It was severe. We were even violent towards each other because we didn't know any better. We knew we loved each other as siblings do, but because we didn't understand love, we didn't know how to express love towards one another. So we did what the adults did in front of us our whole lives. We got physical with each other, and it got really bad at times. We were harmful to each other. So as I grew up and started further in my education, learning about anatomy, physiology, biology, the human body, the mind, and how, like, our bodies and our minds grow it and develop in a natural state, and what happens to the mind and the body when it's not in a natural state, and the harm that we cause to ourselves physically and mentally through the harming part of our lives. Like, it helped me to understand that my siblings and I were, suffering from mental health illnesses. So walking away from them was not an option. I have 4 siblings. Well, there's 4 of us. I have 3 siblings. There's 4 of us. So mom had 2 girls and 2 boys. My sister was born first, then I, then my first younger brother, who's underneath me by 2 years, and then my 3rd younger brother, who's underneath me by 3 years. And even if you don't have a mental health illness, this is what I learned when I studied about mental health illnesses. Like, there's this thing called learned behavior. And what that is, when you are a young child and you live in a community surrounded by people with mental health illnesses and using and abusing drugs, they have this behavior that is violent, that is harmful, and you grow up learning that stuff. Like, you grew up seeing how these adults interact with one another, how they respond to one another, and that is the behavior you learned. So, there could be a situation where somebody may not necessarily have a mental health illness, but they have what is called learned behavior. So when I started learning about mental health illnesses, I had to start looking at a lot of the behaviors that my family was having around me to try to understand if this was actually a learned behavior or if they really had a mental health illness. Now, I want to talk to you about mental health illnesses. There are many different diagnoses. You have depression, you have manic, you have bipolar, you have ADHD, you have schizophrenia, you have DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, you have social anxiety. Um, they even categorized autism under mental health illnesses, which, since I worked in that field, from what I have come to understand, I don't get how the scientists and the researchers categorized autism under mental health diseases, because I truly believe it's more of a developmental disorder. But who am I to say? Because I am not a doctor, I am not a scientist, I do not do, well, I do research, but I'm not licensed in that area. And this is the Matthew Calloway. Am I saying it right? I can't see. I wear glasses. I have them right here, but I don't wear them. But anyway, hi, welcome to my Facebook page, Jonniebee 9458, advocating for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education. So what I was saying, right, is that, again, I am not a doctor, I am not a provider, I am not a counselor, I am not a therapist, I am not a counselor, I am not a psychiatrist, I am not a psychologist. I am just a woman who has a mental health disease, advocating for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education. The tied to education piece is teaching people about mental health illnesses, signs and symptoms, causes and effects, how they can make it difficult for you to manage normal everyday things on a day-to-day basis. And so I just went through the list of different mental health diagnoses. And depending on what your diagnosis is, your signs and symptoms can vary. Um, I want to first address the causes of a mental health disease. So, the causes, if you have a blood relative, such as a mother or a sibling who has a mental health illness, it could make your chances higher of also having a mental health illness, meaning it can be passed down through the family. Certain diagnoses, I know the researchers, the scientists, they say that bipolar is one of the mental health diagnoses that can be passed down through the family. When I was in my, I want to say my late 20s, my mother told me that her mother went crazy and died in a mental institution. And I thought, gee, mom, like people don't go crazy and die. People don't die because they go crazy. So when my mom had shared this information with me, some red flags went up. I needed to do some research because I never met my mother's parents, her mother or her father. Um, I lived my childhood with my mother, who again was very abusive to her 4 children. She had 2 girls, 2 boys. My sister was born first, then me, then my first brother, who was 2 years underneath me, and then my second brother, who is 3 years underneath me. So there's 4 children involved, 3 different men. My sister and I shared the same dad, and then mom had my brother by another man, and then my second brother by a third man involved. And those 3 men, they came and they went, but they did not stay. Mom was a single parent. The 3 fathers involved never offered mom any type of financial support or any other kind of support, which might have been a good thing because even if they gave my mom money to help support their children, because mom was abusing drugs so heavy, she probably wouldn't have spent the money that the fathers would have given her to help with their children. She probably wouldn't have done the things that she needed to do with that money because, again, she was abusing drugs really bad. Um, so again, the causes and effects of mental health diseases. Mom said that her mom went crazy and died in a mental health institution. Mom had some mental health illnesses that went undetected because one, she was taken from her mom when she was 7 years old, never to see or hear from her mother again, which is why I never met my mother's mother. Two, when mom was taken from her mother at the age of 7, did I say, never to see or hear from her mother again, she ended up in foster homes and ended up getting adopted. So she continued to live her life out. However, mom never finished high school. She never furthered her education beyond whatever grade level she dropped out of. Therefore, mom was very undereducated. Mom, on top of being undereducated and abusing drugs, again, her mental health illness went undetected because society just seen a young woman, abusing drugs and just assumed that her signs and symptoms were stemming from her abusing drugs, not realizing that there was some other underlying medical concerns. So, needless to say, my sister, who was my mother's first child, I watched my sister as a child go through things that, we were a year apart. I was right underneath her. And as a little girl, I knew nothing about mental health illnesses. I knew nothing about the disease of addiction. Like, I was a little girl, I didn't know things. But when I would see my sister go through things, I didn't question it because I'm a kid who questions what they see, right? But as an adult, as I look back on me and my sister's life, I realized that my sister was having signs and symptoms even as a young girl as far as a mental health illness. Throughout my sister's life, she was first diagnosed with depression, then it got upgraded to manic, then it got and it could have been manic depression, and then it became just manic, and then it became bipolar. So, as an adult, when I started looking back on my sister's life, like these light bulbs were going off. And like I said, in my mid to late 20s, when my mother told me that her mother went crazy and died in a mental institution, and I look at my sister's life and having to walk beside her and support her and care for her through her mental health illness, again, some red flags started going off because when I got into my mid 20s, I started having signs and symptoms of a mental health illness, which at the time I did not know that those signs and symptoms were coming from a mental health illness. So when the signs and symptoms first started showing up, I was very afraid. Um, I would start I would have these episodes where I would cry all the time. I would cry all the time. I had to at one point even stop watching TV because I would watch a stupid commercial and be bawling my eyes out and couldn't understand why I was crying all the time. Um, I at the time, right, my life was together. I was a new mom. I had my first child when I was 20. So by the time my child turned 5 years old, I started having these signs and symptoms, and I couldn't understand why. When you talk about mental health illnesses, right? During that time, I was a new mom. I loved being a new mom. Um, I was going to school, educating myself. I was working. I had good jobs. I was in a quote unquote somewhat healthy, normal relationship with someone that I ended up being with for 18 years. He was not physically abusive to me, he was not mentally abusive to me. I had a lot of respect in my neighborhood. Um, you know, Living in Boston, right? You have good neighborhoods and you have bad neighborhoods, okay? And the better neighborhoods, that's what I'm gonna say, quote, unquote, "the better neighborhoods," which means people with money. They live in the upper class neighborhoods. Being that I was a young adult, a young mom, I didn't have money, I lived in the poorer neighborhoods. There's a lot of things that go on in Black communities in the poor neighborhoods. Um, when you are young and coming of age, the guy that I was with for 18 years, when I met him, he was 19 years old, and he turned 20 when we got together. However, there are gangs in Boston. And when a young man comes of age, you have these gangs that are trying to get you to join their gang. And in order for you to be able to live your life in that neighborhood, um, you have to be very smart, you have to be very strong to resist having to join a gang. And I'm gonna tell you, those gangs, when they come for these young men, it can get bad. It can get real ugly. It can be real scary. So I lived in a neighborhood where there were gangs involved. There was a lot of violence. Um, but because I didn't involve myself with that stuff, like, I was able to live in my neighborhood and still, like, have some false sense of security, because I grew up in Boston, I wasn't afraid. I those things didn't scare me. I think for some people, right, we just get so accustomed to the things that go on that they just become a normal part of life. So, because I, as a young adult, I worked, I went to school, I was a good mom to my daughter. So when I started having signs and symptoms of a mental health illness in my mid-20s, I couldn't understand why I started having these signs and symptoms because there really wasn't anything major going on in my life that could cause me to feel sad all the time. Um, I was sad all the time, I cried all the time. Um, like I said, every day I would get up in the morning, shower, get dressed, and go to work. At that time, as a young adult, I had not yet learned how to drive, and I didn't have a car, and I had to catch public transportation. If anybody is familiar with the public transit system in Boston, it can be very overwhelming. Um, there's a lot of people that live in Boston. It is the capital of Massachusetts. So a lot of people tend to live in the major cities because of the opportunities for work. Um, if you live in a major city that has like this public transportation system, we have trains, we have buses, we have cabs, we have gypsy cabs. There's really no need to have a car because it's so easy. Well, they make it easy for you to get around, but there's nothing easy about it because, like I said, those buses and trains can be very crowded. But I would get up, shower, get dressed, and go to work every day. And it came a period in time when, out of nowhere, when I would get up in the morning and shower to get dressed to go to work, I started having like this unexplainable, overwhelming sensation of fear. Like I would be terrified to walk out my door to get to work every morning. And I don't know where it came from because I did this stuff all the time. I've done it for years. So all of a sudden now, I would get ready to go to work, but I would start like having a racing heartbeat. I would have shortness of breath. I would start sweating. Um, sometimes while sitting and drinking that morning cup of coffee, I would escape in my mind and lose time. Like, I don't know where I would go, but I would just, like, go up in my head and be far, far away. I don't know where I was, but, I would lose time because I would be stuck inside my head, and after a while, it's like I kinda realized that I was stuck up in my head, and I had to tell myself, like, "Johnny, you gotta go." And when I would come to, I would realize, like, how much time went by, and I ended up starting to be late for work every day because every morning these things started happening to me, and I didn't know what it was, I didn't know why. Anyway, eventually, it started affecting my relationship. So I was with a young man for 18 years, and when we met, we were all in love. We were young, we didn't know anything about life. We were just starting out our life. Um, we had been together so far for like 5 years, and we've always been intimate with each other with no problem. All of a sudden, I don't know why, but I started having this fear about being intimate with him. It got to a point where, I would try to go to bed earlier than him and fake like I was asleep to avoid having being intimate with him. When we did become intimate with each other, I would complain the whole time. Like it was just, I don't know what it was, like why it became so uncomfortable to be intimate with this person who I was in love with. He was good to me. I just couldn't understand it. And then the outburst started happening. Um, so, 5 years into this relationship with this person, I started having these outbursts on him. And in the beginning, it would happen and it was like, okay, it happened, we'd move on. And the way it started, it's like it would happen, we wouldn't acknowledge it, we would move on. And it would be a long time before it would happen again. It would happen, we'd get over it, we'd move on. But what happened was it started happening more frequent and it would be happening like there would be no time as to like you would have an episode, time would pass, and then you would have it again. Like it started happening like all the time. And I couldn't understand why I was having these outbursts on this young man. And when I did finally realize it was happening, it was like I could almost feel it building up within me. And I would tell myself, "Oh God, no, 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 don't do it, don't do it." Like, trying to hold on to it and not freak out on this person. But I had no control of it. It would just be like, rah. And afterwards, when looking in his face and seeing the confusion, the fear, the hurt that I caused to this person, um, you know, I tried so hard not to let this happen. Like I said, I could feel it building up. I could feel when like I had to stop avoiding him because I couldn't control these outbursts that I was having with this young man. And anyway, it got to a point that he and I started having conversations about the things that I started experiencing in our relationship together. Um, he had suggested that I start seeking help, you know, going to counseling, going to see a therapist. And he even offered to go with me to support me. We needed to figure out what was happening to me. Like, why, after 5 years of being one way, that I started having these other behaviors. And so that's what started my journey of discovering that I had a mental health illness. Um, After some time of going to counseling and doing therapy, I got my diagnosis. They said that I have depression, that I have anxiety attacks, and that I have panic attacks. Now it's like I needed to learn about this diagnosis, signs and symptoms, causes and effects, um, and began to realize that this whole time, mom had a mental health illness, my sister had a mental health illness, and now I have a mental health illness. So that's what I mean by, it can be passed down. And although the researchers and the scientists, right, they say the number one mental health diagnosis that can be passed down is bipolar. I myself have never been diagnosed with bipolar. It has always been depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. Um, and I gotta tell you, during that time, when I started having these signs and symptoms of this behavior, by then my daughter was like 4 or 5 years old. She started to grow and she started like being a child, like getting into things. Um, I would get upset with her. Um, I would try to discipline her, but realized that because I was a child who was abused, severely abused by my mom, I grew afraid for my daughter. Like I didn't want to do to my daughter what my mom had done to me, and when I started having signs and symptoms of my mental health illness, I thought it would be a good idea to take both me and my daughter to get some therapy. So I took my daughter with me, and I would have a therapy session for an hour one-on-one with my therapist, and while I was getting my therapy one-on-one with my therapist, they also would counsel my daughter, who was, like, 5 years old, 6 years old at the time. She would be with her therapist for, like, an hour, and then after both of us finished our hour session, they would bring us into the room together and then counsel us together. I had to learn parenting skills. I had to learn how to, communicate with this young person on the level of a young person's, mentality as far as her being, like, 5 years old. I had to learn how to communicate with her. They taught me parenting skills, like how to connect with this young person in a healthy, loving, caring way, because, when you grow up and you are severely abused as a child, when you do grow up, most people would think that when you have a child, like, these things should come naturally to you. However, that was not the case for me. Like, yes, I loved my child, and the first 4 or 5 years of raising my child, I'm not gonna say it wasn't difficult, being that I too was now a single parent. Um Even though I was in a relationship with someone, I met him when my daughter was still in diapers, and he gravitated to me and my daughter. His family, took to me and my daughter and took us in, and we became part of their family. Um, he never had any children of his own, but to this day, he considers my daughter as his child, and my daughter, even though she now knows her biological father and has a somewhat relationship with her biological father, the man who raised her, the guy I was with for 18 years, to her, that's daddy. And they still have a relationship to this day, and they're very close. But my point in saying all that is, even though I was a single parent, I did have somebody who was somewhat healthy, um, for me and my daughter, and, he played the father role. However, you can also be traumatized by relationships. What I mean by that is, even though this young man loved and cared for me and my daughter deeply, even though he was not physically or mentally abusive towards me, because we lived in the Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester sections, um, and we were both I was he was 19 when I met him, and I was 20. When I turned 21, he turned 20. When I turned 22, he turned 21. But when you are young adults and you live in the Roxbury, Dorchester sections of Boston, like I said, he was a young man, he was coming of age, there were gangs. Um, there were a lot of times that he got into confrontations with gang members who wanted him to join their gang, and he did not. Um, he ended up in a lot of fights. Um, it was bad. Um, there were weapons involved. And, he would get caught with a weapon, unregistered, no license, automatic first year for your first offense. So this is how we lived our life. This young man had to keep going away from me to go serve time in prison. And during that time, I was a single parent. You know, when you're dating a young man and you live in a neighborhood that there is so much pressure, you have like gang members, you have like teenage pregnancies, there is a lot of dealing drugs, using drugs. It's bad. It's bad. Um, so when he would go away, like he can't help pay rent, he can't help pay bills from prison. I being a single mom, it was my apartment. I had to continue to pay rent and pay bills and take care of my daughter. And I did that. Like I said, the whole 18 years that I was with this young man, I had to watch him, like, fighting with gangs, getting shot, getting stabbed, in and out of jail, on the run from the cops. It was bad, and it had a effect on my mental health. I was young, I didn't know any better. Like I said, I was 20 when I met him, and I was struggling with some issues with my own family members, and he came from a more quote unquote stable family unit where all the family members loved one another, took care of one another. Um, so when he and I started dating and he brought me home and introduced me to his family. Like I said, his family, um, took to me and my daughter, and they took us in, and we became a part of their family, and that was good for me because it was the first time that I got to experience, quote, unquote, "a normal family structure." Like I said, I didn't have that with my family because mom had a mental health illness. I never met my mother's mother and father. Mom said her father passed away when she was 18 years old. She was taken from her mother when she was 7 years old, never to hear or see her mother, never to see or hear from her mother again. She was an only child. She didn't have any brothers or sisters. I didn't have any aunts or uncles or cousins from my mother's side of the family. Um, because of my mother's undetected mental health issues, because of the way my mom used and abused drugs, she was very violent and very abusive to her 4 children. So, like I said, I didn't know what it was like to be in a quote unquote normal family structure. And the guy that I was with for 18 years, he came from that. He lived in a better neighborhood. Tell me why this young man lived in a better neighborhood, right? You have people in Boston, right, that live in good neighborhoods, right? And they will leave their good neighborhoods to come hang out in our neighborhoods, like the quote unquote poorer neighborhoods, which I never understood because the people who lived in the quote unquote poorer neighborhoods, we were trying so hard to get out of those neighborhoods and get to the better neighborhoods. And here you have people that actually live in the better neighborhoods and they're coming to hang out in our neighborhoods. Like, I don't know what's up with that. But anyway, so yeah, I kinda had the best of both worlds. I spent a lot of time at my boyfriend's mother's house in the good neighborhoods whenever I wanted to get out of my neighborhood, but I could also go home and hang out in my neighborhood. And Imma tell you, even though we lived in a poor neighborhood, right? And there was gangs and there was violence and there was you know, I'm gonna say the world of hustling instead of using selling drugs all the time because there were other things being sold in those neighborhoods as well, such as weapons. So I'm just gonna say the hustling world so I don't get banned from social media. But even though all these things were going on in my neighborhood, there was like a certain kind of love that people had for one another. It was weird. Like, even though you had gangs like competing with each other about, you know, um, hustling money and um I gotta slow my brain down, guys. Fighting over territory, right? There was still this sense of love that we had for one another. Like there were times where we could get together and hang out and enjoy each other's company. Um, people would seem to be like really close and we all knew each other. And this was like the good times, although there was some really bad times as well. um, in Boston, you can't just go out and stand outside and be like in la la land. Like you got to be aware of your surroundings at all times because just about anything can jump off at any moment, which probably why I have anxiety and panic attacks. I grew up in societies where, you know, at any minute anything could jump off and you'd have to be alert. You'd have to know like the exit routes. You had to know the escape routes. A lot of that growing up in that could have probably caused my anxiety and panic attacks. Who knows? Um, anyway, guys, so that was me just talking about how my life was when in my mid-20s, I started having signs and symptoms of a mental health disease and started seeking treatment, and addressing, like identifying what was going on with me, acknowledging what was going on with me, and then addressing what was going on with me by going to my doctors and having conversations, going to counseling and therapy, getting my diagnosis. Um, I also teach about the stigmas because, like I said, most people are acceptable to having conversations about medical ailments like hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases. But again, you start talking about mental health issues and people get all weird. They don't know what to say, they don't know how to respond. Um, Even though this young man that I was dating at the time had suggested that I get help for my signs and symptoms because they were affecting our relationship. And like I said, we stayed together for 18 years. Um, I don't think he knew that they were going to eventually introduce medications to me. And I remember the first time that I came home with meds, and because of the stigmas in our neighborhoods, in our communities regarding mental health illnesses and mental health providers and mental health meds, when I did come home with the mental health meds, he told me it was a placebo. And I believed it, so I never started my meds, right? I put it in the cabinet and I just left it there, because I let other people's, fears and misinformation, about mental health meds stop me from taking my mental health meds. At that time, when he introduced me to his mother was a very religious, church-going person. Um, Me, myself, like, when I grew up in my mother's house, I never heard the word God. I never heard the word church. I never heard the word Bible. I never heard the word religion, right? These are things that I had to learn outside my mother's home through other people and their families. Um, Throughout my life, I had attended church with other people, but I really didn't understand anything about church or religion or God or the Bible. I only went with people to church because at that time, um, it was something that I had to do, not that I wanted to do it. If you read my book, God's Gift to You, book one, you will know. I try to talk around my book because I don't want to give the book away. I want people to really read my book to really understand and be informed about children being abused. Imma tell you now, if you are faint at heart, if you are sensitive to children being abused, I'm gonna warn you, I am very open, I am very honest, I am very, descriptive, um, about my experiences as a young girl growing up in a neighborhood that was very toxic and very abusive to the children. But you would have to read the book to better understand how people can grow up and develop mental health diseases, causes and effects, signs and symptoms. Anyway, um, yeah, so I never heard the word church or anything in my mom's house. And it wasn't until I was probably in my teenage years that I ended up with people that attended church services, and I had to go just because I had to go. Like, I had no interest in it. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what the purpose of it all was. And it wasn't until I met my boyfriend that I was with for 18 years, and his mom was very heavy in religion in attending church. And I attended her, church services with her. Um, it was her who, um, really introduced me to religion, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, the Holy Bible, scriptures, teachings. She was what they would call Pentecostal. So I started learning about the Pentecostal religion. She coached me and, not just knowing God, but having a relationship with God. So that's how I was introduced to religion. Again, I was in my mid-20s. Even though I was learning about this religion, I really did not yet quite fully understand it. I did not yet quite fully have a full relationship with this God. I was very angry with this so-called God because I couldn't understand how God would put babies here on this earth and allow them to be physically, mentally, spiritually, financially, sexually abused. Um, so I was very angry and very confused with this so-called God. So I struggled with trying to build a relationship with this God. Um, However, because society um there are so many people who practice religion, and sometimes we tend to conform to what society teaches us or quote unquote tells us what's normal. Um, I felt an obligation to study this religion, study this God, study the Holy Bible, like get to know it, accept it. However, I struggled through my whole life with religion because when people teach religion, I found the Holy Bible to be very contradicting. On one part, it says we should do A, B, C, D. On another part, it says don't do A, B, C, D. So you'd be like, what the heck? Um, I struggled with honor thy mother and father. I kind of wondered, like, how is a person supposed to honor thy mother and father when they were so abusive to us? Um, I honored them anyway because the Bible told me that I should honor thy mother and father. It didn't say only if your mother and father were good to you, right? It just says honor your mother and father. And I didn't understand it, but I did it anyway. But later on in life, as I grew in my teachings of religion and in my teachings of scripture, I realized that even though the Bible says, "Honor thy mother and father," it doesn't say you have to be in their life. It doesn't say you have to accept being abused. So I had to learn how to get past the fact that my parents were harmful to me and still love them and still honor them. Um, yes, I love my parents immensely. I would never so-called not have my parents in my life, because of the mental health illnesses throughout our family. Sometimes I have to remove myself from people. Sometimes I have to set boundaries. But to sit there and say that I would never talk to my parents again or not have contact with them, absolutely not. Both my parents are now in their 70s. Um, for my dad, I am his only child. He there was um, my sister lost her battle to her mental health illness at the age of 35 in 2003. So dad no longer has two girls. He only has one, me. And with him being in his 70s, like I couldn't even imagine not being able to hear my father's voice or have a conversation with my father while I am still able to, while he is still on this earth, because with him being in his 70s, I don't know how much time I have left with this man. Um, do I sometimes have to remove myself from him? Do I sometimes have to set boundaries to protect my mental health? Absolutely. But never to speak to my father again? Yeah, we're not doing that. Same thing with my mom. She's in her 70s. Um, Sometimes, yes, I have to remove myself from my mom. Sometimes, yes, I have to set boundaries from my mom. Sometimes, yes, I don't feel like talking to my mom because she has a mental health illness. She, to this day, has not identified, acknowledged, or addressed her mental health illnesses. And sometimes when she is having signs and symptoms of her mental health illness and I'm around her, it can trigger me. There are times when I'm in my mother's presence and I can't breathe. I have shortness of breath. Um, I get like, I have to get away from her. I cannot. I can't do it. But it doesn't mean that I don't love my mom. It doesn't mean that I don't wanna be a part of her life. Like I said, I don't know how much time I have left with my mom, and mom had 2 girls and 2 boys. Her firstborn, which was my sister, we are a year apart, lost her battle to her mental health disease at the age of 35 in 2003. So that would make me the oldest now out of my mother's children. That would make me the only daughter that my mom has left. I am not going to ever not speak to my mother. I understand the disease of mental health illnesses. I understand the causes and the effect. I understand the signs and the symptoms. I understand that my mother may have a mental health illness and it is not really responsible for her actions, whether it caused me harm or not. Um, I'm not saying it's okay to continue to let my mom abuse me because she has as an adult child until I realized I had a mental health disease and started learning about mental health diseases. I continued to let my mother abuse me even as an adult because I didn't know it was abuse. I didn't know that mom was causing harm to me. I didn't realize this stuff until I was probably in my late 20s. And even then, it still took time to learn that mom was triggering me. Um, mom was, having mental health illnesses, like, it was so much information that I had to learn, and then even still, I had to learn how to, um, manage my mental health disease, support mom and my sister through their mental health illnesses, stay healthy myself, but still be there for my mom and my sister. Um, and like I said, with mom being in her 70s now, I don't know how much time I have to be able to hear my mother's voice or be in her life because I don't know how much time she has left on this earth. And being that I am now her only daughter, I am not going to deny her a relationship with her daughter because of our mental health issues. Yes, I had to learn how to be able to have a healthy relationship with my mom because of her mental health illness, and I had to learn how to protect myself in my mental health illness. Like I said, sometimes I can't be in my mother's presence because I have a lot of anxiety. I don't know if it's all that stuff, in the back of my mind, because, we talk about forgiveness. Like, yes, we forgive people, but we don't forget. We don't forget, especially if those people are still being harmful to you, especially if those people have not yet identified, acknowledged, or addressed whatever mental health issues they have going on. They're still the same people, whether you change, whether you get better, whether you're on treatment, these people are still the same people. How do you continue to have a relationship with these people when you're trying to take care of you and still be in their life, even though they're not addressing their mental health issues? Like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And again, people talk about forgiveness, let go, move on. We do all that stuff, but we don't forget. I can't forget because the things that my mother has done to me in my childhood still affects me to this day. It affects my day-to-day, um, daily activities. I had to do a lot of work on myself as far as, my signs and symptoms of my mental health illness. Like I can get triggered at any time. Um, I'm gonna slow my brain down because part of my mental health disease, I have racing thoughts. And sometimes it goes by so fast that I could lose the information. Sometimes I can get it back, sometimes I cannot. So I'm gonna tell you guys, right? Causes of a mental health illness. I don't know if I went over this with you guys yet or not. So your brain, right, has your brain is called like it's soft tissue, right? And it sits under your skeletal bone, which the purpose of the skeletal bone is to protect that soft tissue underneath it where it lives. And if you end up in a physical fist fight with someone and they hit you in just the right spot in your head and that soft tissue underneath that skeletal bone, it doesn't take much for it to shift even just a little bit because the human body was not designed to take blunt force trauma to your head. It can lead to a long lasting medical concern. That's why I don't understand how people in society has grown so accustomed. It's like we're addicted to violence. We see a fight, we want to stop, we want to look, we laugh, it's funny. Do you guys not realize that these two people are causing harm to each other? And as adults, right, we should have learned by now how to deal with confrontation without putting our hands on each other. It can lead to somebody having a long lasting medical concern with their mental health. Another cause for a mental health. So the brain has what is called neurotransmitters. neurotransmitters. They are the chemicals that your brain naturally produces to sustain itself. For some people, those neurotransmitters, maybe they become injured. The bottom line is, right, with me and my mental health disease, depression, my brain doesn't make enough of one of those chemicals. Therefore, the mental health medication that I take, it's called Celexa. I take 20 milligrams of Celexa. And what that is these doctors and these chemists mixed some chemicals together and put it in a little tiny pill for people who have mental health diseases to take because, like I said, your brain is supposed to naturally produce these chemicals. And for some of us, the brain is falling behind in one of those chemicals. So that's where the mental health meds come in. You have to get that chemical in your brain for your brain to be quote unquote normal. So, besides having injury or sustaining injury to your head, besides mental health illnesses being passed on from family member to family member, meaning it runs in the family, besides the chemicals in your brain being off, these are all causes that can lead to a mental health illness. The researchers, the scientists, the studies also state that environmental factors can play a role in somebody having mental health issues such as PTSD, post traumatic stress syndrome. If you were severely abused through your childhood, you may possibly have a mental health illness. Um, if you have been in an abusive relationship, that can cause a mental health disorder. Um, so those are the causes, signs and symptoms. It's hard for me when I try to have long-term lasting relationships with people because I can be triggered. If somebody yells at me, when I was a little girl, when mom couldn't get her choice of drug, she screamed this horrific scream, and she would scream at her children all the time. When I was a little girl, it didn't affect me because I didn't know any better. I just thought that was my mom and that what she does, but, of course, I would be like, "Why is this woman screaming at me? Like, what's going on?" But as an adult, right, when people would scream at me, it triggers me. Now I cry. I cry because I don't know if mom screaming at me all the time as a young girl, even though it's not in the front of my mind, it's buried way back there because we tend to learn how to take these experiences, right, and put them in a little box, right, and stick it away in the back of our minds like we do in our closets when we stick boxes like way back in the closet and that's the box you don't touch, it just sits there, right? We tend to do that with some of our experiences in life that were traumatic to us. We take that information and we store it away in the back of our minds and we don't deal with it. It just sits there. But subconsciously you are acting out on this traumatic experience. Like I said, as an adult, when people tend to yell at me, it triggers me. I try not to let it happen. I try not to cry. I try not to let it affect me, but it does. I start to cry because I'm being triggered. I start. I can't breathe. This stuff happens to me that I have no control over. Trust me, I've tried. It doesn't work. And I'm going to tell you, right? When I'm crying, right? I think it's just a release. Like, it's so much going on, and I get so overwhelmed with it all that I need a way to get it out. So I cry. If I get, like, really angry and I feel like I want to harm someone or put my hands on someone, I cry because I'm so angry and I don't know what else to do with that anger. And if you try to keep it inside, right, you can't do it. Like, you have to release it. So I cry. I cry when I get real, real angry. If somebody hurts me, I'm gonna tell you guys, right? People have emotions, right? So, since I started talking about my mental health illness, right? Again, the climate around the topic of mental health illnesses, right? Since I started talking about my mental health illnesses, right? People will sometimes take that information and use it to hurt me or to injure me. People tie mental health diseases to crazy. What is crazy? Who defines what crazy is and what crazy isn't? I also teach about the myths about mental health illnesses. Some people tie being quote unquote stupid to people with mental health illnesses. Again, what is stupid? Who defines what stupid is and what stupid's not? Sometimes, right, when I get into confrontations with people, right, they tend to respond negatively to anger, right? People get angry, whether you have a mental health disease or not. Anger is a normal human emotion. A lot of people will tie sadness to depression. Yes, everybody gets sad sometimes, but people with mental health illnesses, right? We tend to be sad a lot, right? But Imma tell you something, there are other emotions too. I have days where I feel happiness. I have days when I feel joy. But just like we have those normal, healthy human emotions, right? Nobody can walk around being freaking happy all day, every day. There are other emotions. There's sadness, there's sorrow, there's anger, there's confusion. There's a whole range of human emotions that is natural. I don't know why when I tend to get angry, right? People think, "Oh, here she go acting crazy again. Oh, I seen you being angry." Yeah, I was angry. Like, people don't get angry. It is a normal healthy emotion. Anger, right? When people injure you or cause you harm, it is normal to get angry. Do I go out there and cause harm to people? Absolutely not. But yes, I get angry. Yes, I get sad. I feel sorrow. I feel a whole lot of stuff. I do have days where I am happy, joyous, and free, but I'm gonna tell you that's not every day. Um, I gotta slow my brain down because it's going too fast. I am not the only person in this world with a mental health disease, right? And sometimes we have to deal with people who have mental health illnesses. There's a stigma. What does a person with a mental health illness looks like? There are millions of people walking around with a mental health illness, right? Not all of us is stupid. I'm a very well educated person. I not only have the formal educational institution education, I also have street knowledge. I am a woman in my mid 50s who grew up in Boston in the Roxbury and Dorchester sections in the 70s and the 80s. I've done a lot, I've seen a lot, I've experienced a lot, I have survived a lot. So not only do I have the formal educational institutions, information, and education, I also have street knowledge. I have principles and morals. I know right from wrong. But because I am not the only one in this world walking around with a mental health disease, right? Try dating people. I told you I was in a relationship with someone for 18 years, right? And after 18 years, I walked away from that relationship because one, there was some very dangerous things going on in that person's life, and I did not need to continue to put myself in harm's way. Um, Two, because when I met him, he was 19, I was 20. We are now in our mid 40s, and he is still out there doing the same things that he was doing when I met him at 19 years old. Unfortunately, some of us grow up, we mature, we grow up. Some of us do not. We stay stuck, and I get it. There's a lot of people in Boston that have never lived outside of Boston. They're stuck. So when I talk about God's gift to you, like the title of my book, right? It's not about religion, it's about those gifts. One, that I'm still here, that I survived it all. Two, I may have a mental health disease, but I am far from stupid and far from crazy. My point in saying that, right, is throughout my years of dating, right, I've come to realize that there's a lot of men in the world with mental health illnesses, relationships that, whether they intended harm to me or not, they still harmed me. Just because a person doesn't intend to harm you doesn't mean the harm didn't happen. How about people who have post traumatic stress syndrome from dating people who have mental health illnesses? Yeah, when you meet them at first, it seems all normal. They talk to you normal. Um, they appear to be normal, but you don't really know somebody until you have spent enough time with that person to really get to know that person. And then you realize, like, there's some stuff going on here. I know myself, I cannot be with just anybody because some people may trigger me or mess with my mental health disease. And I can't allow that. How about people that, like, when you get into a normal confrontation with people, right? Because, like, let's be real, right? You fight with your parents, you fight with your siblings, you fight with your children, you fight with your loved ones, but you don't want to cause harm to those people. You're not going to stop talking to your children because you had a dispute, right? So confrontation happens every day and it's normal, right? When you have relationships with people, at some point you are going to have a confrontation, disagreement, or dispute. It's how you deal with it that is what's going to matter. How are your communication skills? Do you know how to communicate with people even when you're angry? I have had people that got into disputes or confrontations with me, right? And they said, "Oh, she must be off her meds. Oh, there she go, acting crazy again." Really? Because I don't agree with what you have to say, because I challenge the information that you are presenting because I don't take everybody's word for anything. I need to know, like, what's really good. Like, what are you saying? What does it mean? Doesn't make me crazy. It means that I have a brain who thinks, who questions, who wonders. My point is saying that, like I said, I have dated men with mental health issues. I am a woman in my mid 50s. I've never been married. It's not like I didn't get the proposal. I didn't think that that person was ready for marriage. Hell, I didn't think I was ready for marriage. I've dated men that, let me tell you guys, society has gotten so conformed to normalizing lying, cheating, manipulation, telling you half the truth. I've met men, right? And when they approach me and they want to talk to me and they ask me for my number, right? I'm a smart girl. I'm gonna ask all the right questions. Number one, do you have a girl? Are you with somebody? Are you married? Men lie. They lie. And then when you try to believe them, like we're both adults, right? Like I don't have the mindset of lying and cheating and manipulation. Like none of that stuff occurs to me. Do I know that it exists? Yes, I do. But I can't approach everybody like they're going to just automatically lie, cheat, and manipulate. So we tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? So when men approach me and they want to talk to me and they ask me for my number, I ask all the right questions. We date, we try to see where we're at, right? After 3 months of dating, right? The real person shows up. I'm talking about being traumatized in relationships, right? And the world, right, is so conformed to normalizing this nonsense, right? Like I posted some stuff up, right, about a relationship that I had with a young man off and on for 10 years, right? And this man, he knew about my mental health illness, right? And while we were living together, he decided to start seeing another woman while I was living with him in his home, right? And he told this woman about my mental health illness, right? Now, I'm a rational person. I work every day. I have never been in a mental institution. I have depression. I have not yet been diagnosed with bipolar. I don't have schizophrenia. I don't have DID. I simply have depression, right? And I work every day. And I'm a smart girl. So while I was living with this man, right, he started seeing this other woman while I was still living in his house. And he told this woman about my mental health disease, right? When I found out about the relationship, I got in touch with the woman. I wanted to know because I knew that he would never tell me the truth. I knew that he was lying. I knew that he was manipulating me. Like he didn't want me to leave, right? But if you didn't want me to leave, like why are you already stepping out of the relationship to pursue somebody else? And when I try to confront him and get questions answered, he would lie. He would lie. I knew he would never tell me the truth. So I went to the girl. This is a nurse who lives in Boston, right? She lives and she works in Boston. She's a nurse. She went to school to become a nurse, right? She got her license. She's a nurse, right? When I confronted her about her relationship with my man, right? I posted up on social media The interactions through text with this woman, right? And some of the response that I got was like, "Oh, some stuff don't need to be on social media." Why not? If I'm going to teach about mental health illnesses, right? Let's get real about it. So this nurse, right? You went to school to study medicine. You know about medical ailments, physical ailments, mental ailments. You're a nurse, right? You care about people. You care about the wellness of people. You're a nurse, right? So when I confronted this woman and the way this woman attacked me using my mental health as her weapon. This is a nurse who lives in Boston, right? Her name is Delphine. I'm going to put it out there. So this chick thought it was a good idea to go to my man's house and engage in physical things that go on between a man and a woman, right? In his bed where we slept. She even told me that my bathrobe was hanging on the back of his bedroom door while she was in his bed doing physical things that men and women do together. So this nurse, right? Miss Delphine, right? She puts up on her Facebook page talking about religion and God, you know, teaching about religion, right? How is it that people say they believe in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, say that they believe in the Holy Bible, right? They're posting all this good stuff up on social media, right? But yet you're running around here sleeping with a man who's already in a relationship and had a woman living with him while you were sleeping in his bed with him, right? And I'm gonna tell you, when people do things to you, right? As long as you stay quiet about it, it's cool. But the minute you start speaking up for yourself and speaking up against the injustice, people get bumped into feelings. They get angry. They get their feelings hurt, right? But were they thinking about you at the time that they were causing you harm? Were they thinking about your feelings or injuring you when they were doing what they knew was wrong, but did it anyway? Because she didn't care about who she was affecting. She only cared about herself and what she wanted, right? This nurse, Miss Delphine from Boston, right? Tell me why 4 years later she's still with this man. He don't want to marry her. They're still not married. He don't want to marry her. She told me that she don't want to marry him. So you mean to tell me that you believe in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. You believe in the Bible. You believe in scriptures, right? You're posting up all this good stuff on social media, right? But you are in a 4-year relationship with a man that you don't want to marry. You're a nurse, right? And the woman, you knew he was in a relationship with someone already, right? And you took her mental health ailment and you used it as a weapon to hurt her as if you weren't hurting her enough by sleeping with her man. Oh yeah, I'm gonna piss a lot of people off. If I want to teach about mental health illnesses, right? I need to be totally open, right? Because these are the things that can affect a person's mental health. Like, first of all, this man who I loved off and on for 10 years, right, and knew about my mental health illness, thought it was a good idea to take that information and tell the woman he was cheating on me with about my mental health illness, right? And this woman took that information and to add insult to injury, you were already cheating or sneaking behind my back to sleep with my man, but then you took my mental health ailment and you used it as a weapon to hurt me because I spoke up about you sneaking behind my back and sleeping with my man. He's not my man anymore, but guess what? You thought you had something really good going, right? He was the man of your dreams. He blew your back out. He blew your mind, right? And here you guys are 4 years into the relationship and you know he still cheats on you, right? Because everything he does to me, he is now doing to you. You thought you had something good, honey. You thought you were doing something by taking my man from me. Enjoy. Because everybody knows he still cheats on you. And you know it too. And you talk about my mental health illness, right? How's your mental health status? How do you stay 4 years with a man that first of all, you took from another woman, second of all, he cheats on you, third of all, you know, fourth of all, we all know, fifth of all, you're still with them. 4 years. And you don't wanna marry him. You say that, but we all know you do. You know, we're talking about mental health illnesses, right? And the climate that society has around mental health ailment, right? Because, like I said, as long as you shut up and put up, it's all cool. But the minute you start speaking up about it, see, I have learned, right? I grew up fighting with this, but now that I'm a woman, I fight with this my knowledge, my wisdom. When the woman and I was texting back and forth, right? I guess she didn't realize, right, by you texting me, right, I had the proof. And yes, I posted up on social media. One, because I am teaching about mental health awareness and how people respond to people with mental health awareness and how people take our mental health illness and use it as a weapon to hurt us. But you're a nurse, right? You went to school to be a nurse. You got your license. You're working in Boston as a nurse, caring for patients. Caring for patients. You say you're a nurse. You say you care about people, right? You talk about God. You talk about the Holy Bible. Hmm. And this is the problem with society, right? They wonder why people are walking around with mental health illnesses because society and the climate around people conforming to the most ridiculous and outrageous things and try to convince you that you should just accept it because everybody does it, right? Hmm. Yes, I got over it. Yes, I went on with my life, but I didn't forget. I didn't forget because let me tell you something. During that time, because of my mental health, right? I went through some stuff. I went through some stuff. Yes, I'm better now. Yes, I got over it, right? And this ain't about those people. This is about me speaking up against people who cause me harm. This is about me advocating for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education. For some reason, society has conformed to people lying, cheating, manipulating, causing each other harm. And society tries to convince you that you should like just conform to it because everybody else is doing it. But the minute you speak up and go against the grain, you're the crazy one. So I am going to be speaking up and sharing my story, right? Because there's a lot of them. That's why I never been married at 55 years old. It's not because I'm stupid. It's not because I'm undereducated. It's not because I'm crazy. It's because I am not the only one out here with a mental health illness walking around, right? With my mental health illness, right? I don't lie. I don't cheat. I don't manipulate. If I know a man is with a woman, I ask the right questions. If he lies, That's on him. And when people came and told me about this man, right? I went to him and I told him what I found out, and he said to me, he just wants to be happy. Meaning, yes, it is true what they told me about the girl he was with, but they weren't together at that point. And obviously, after 18 years of being with this woman, he was tired. He wanted to move on. So he pursued me. And you know what he did? 3 months after he strung me along in this relationship, putting up that good face, right? After 3 months, he went back to his girl. He didn't have a conversation with me. He didn't tell me, "Hey, I think I'm gonna try to work things out with my girl." He ghosted me. He ghosted me. Stop calling me, stop taking my calls, stop returning my messages. He ghosted me. And guess what? When things didn't work out with that girl again, right? Yeah, I took him back. I took him back because I forgave him, because I loved him, because I wanted to make it work. I believed him. I trusted him. So I spent the next 10 years of my life going around in circles with this man. And after 10 years, we discussed trying to make it work and moving in together, right? And when I moved in with him, not even 3 months down the line, he was already picking out his next girl. And I knew it. So I left. I moved out of the way. You wanna? I'm gonna move out your way. What did he do? He got in a relationship with the girl. And when I confronted Miss Delphine, the nurse in Boston, about it, she used my mental health illness as a weapon to injure me. Read the messages. I posted them up all over social media. Do I care if I piss her off? Absolutely not, because she didn't care when she knew he had a man and she was still sleeping with him. And this is not about revenge. It's not about throwing people out there. It's about me walking in my truth, right? Like these people, they judge people with mental health diseases, right? They have no idea what we go through. They have no idea. Anyway, guys, I am way past my time. I usually only go for an hour and a half, but it was getting good up in here, right? And Miss Delphine, come for me if you want to, honey. Because I'm going to tell you this, right? For people who don't want people talking about their business on social media, you need to start treating people better. Don't give people a reason to be blasting you on social media. How about that? I'm going to let you people know, right? I'm a single woman. I'm in my mid 50s. If you're going to step to me, if you're going to pursue me in a relationship, you better come correct, because I will put you out there. Because I am going to start speaking up against the injustices of people with mental health illnesses, how people see us, what they do to us, how they judge us, how they criticize us, how they want us to shut up and take it. We're not shutting up and taking it anymore. I'm going to teach the world about mental health illnesses, signs and symptoms, causes and effects, being traumatized in relationships, people who talk about God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, the Holy Bible, practicing nursing in the medical field, learning about people's physical and mental ailments. And as a nurse, you're supposed to be caring for these people, right? Living a double life. You're one person when you're at work and a whole different person in your personal life. So I'm gonna tell you now, men, when you come for me, right, you better come correct. If you don't want me talking about you all over social media, right? Because I'm not an evil person. I'm a kind, loving, caring person. And normally I don't put my business out there on social media. But guess what? Some people need to be blasted on social media in the hopes that people will start to do better, treat people better, practice what you teach. Don't play with me. How about that? I'm ending, you guys. Hope everyone have a good night. Be well. I am.